Thank Mullen, grumpy old Scotsman. There's an old saying, get woke, go broke. It's been a saying that's been around for a while now. We already know that Ubisoft is essentially carving off a big chunk of itself, and Tencent, the Chinese game developer, has bought a 25% stake in what will essentially become the new Ubisoft. Let's take a look at some of the games that Ubisoft are known for. There we go. Assassin's Creed Shadows, absolute woke train wreck. Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora, the last half, woke train wreck. Anno, I'm actually looking forward to Anno 117 coming out. That's not a woke train wreck. You can't turn Anno into a woke train wreck. It's a top-down, basically real-time strategy game. Star Wars Outlaws, last half, woke train wreck. Rogue, Prince of Persia, dead. Absolutely dead. Nobody plays Prince of Persia now. The Crew, Motorfest, dead. Nobody plays that either. Assassin's Creed Mirage, last half, woke train wreck. I think you know where I'm going with this. Over the past 10 years, the vast majority of games that Ubisoft have been releasing have been leaning further and further and further into the woke mind virus left. And why has this happened? Well, it's the same reason that this is happening to Electronic Arts. From real sports to esports. Why Saudi Arabia spent $55 billion on Electronic Arts. The deal was confirmed a couple of days ago. Electronic Arts, one of the biggest game developers and game publishers, responsible for games like the Battlefield series, responsible for publishing, and for that matter for developing under BioWare games like the Mass Effect series, basically sold themselves on the cheap, because the actual pricing for Electronic Arts should have been double that $55 billion price tag. But the truth of the matter is a very simple one. EA went woke. They've now gone broke. They have been hemorrhaging money left, right and centre for the past half decade, and a lot of it is down to game developers like BioWare that decided to take a franchise and turn it into an LGBTQ propaganda movie. Don't believe me? Take a look at this. This is a clip from Dragon Age Veilguard. I'm going to mute my mic and then turn on the main desk. Here we go.
Non-binary. I just said, and I'm going to use they instead of she from now on.
If this is because I have criticized your dress or your manners...
It isn't!
Under the Cune, the term for one whose gender does not match the one given to them at birth was a cunithlock. Perhaps you are like that.
Why do you have to keep picking at it? Why can't you just be happy for me?
Evatash, chakra to ebra.
So I'm supposed to struggle with who I am? Even if I don't feel like I fit, even if I feel wrong?
No, you misunderstand.
Unmute the mic, Vic. What the f*** was that? And here's the thing. That's just a small clip of what is essentially an 8-minute long video. And that 8-minute long video doesn't even cover all of the LGBTQ propaganda that's been shoehorned into Dragon Age. As you can probably tell, Dragon Age is a medieval fantasy game where you basically kill dragons. All of a sudden, it's about binary trans people. And it's not even a person. It's a horned demon type thing. And Electronic Arts was wondering why Dragon Age Veilguard sales were less than 50% of what they projected. You get woke, you go broke. But where does this leave us? Well, let's run up to why this is happening. Now, Electronic Arts, BioWare especially, and a lot of the developers for Ubisoft were founded by boomers, essentially. Boomers, baby boomers. But those boomers started to retire. And what replaced them was older millennials, who were not quite part of the woke mind virus, but they leaned slightly left. But they didn't play in to the whole, more trans rights. Okay, what rights don't you have as a trans person? Because I get into this argument very frequently over on Facebook. Very frequently. And one of the things they generally tend to say is, we don't have the same employment rights. Name the employment rights you don't have. That's when they normally block me. Yeah. But you look at what's been happening here. The Dragon Age Veilguard sales being less than 50% of what they expected it to be, because the word got out. It was basically one propaganda movie, essentially, for the LGBT cause. You look at what happened to Electronic Arts, especially the last 3 games, including Dragon Age Veilguard here, that was released by BioWare, and you look at the plummeting sales, not just for Electronic Arts, but for Ubisoft, and you look at what happened to these game dev companies like BioWare that had all these late boomers and early millennials coming in to replace the boomers. Now the millennials are leaving to go found their own company. Who's replacing them? And that's where you start to notice the trend. Because all over Blue Sky, B-Sky, which is the woke left version of Twitter, and all over Twitter for the past 5 to 10 years, you've seen the usual crowd. They usually have a nose ring, they usually have blue, purple, pink or green hair, and they're usually overweight, morbidly obese overweight. And they usually sit there getting a job in places like Electronic Arts, in BioWare, or in Ubisoft, and they have only one thing on their mind: LGBTQ rights. But here's the thing: they ignore the lesbians, they ignore the gays, they ignore the bis. They only concentrate on trans people. They only concentrate on trans. It's like the rest of that letter soup doesn't exist to them. And they're sitting there constantly pushing for more trans issues to be put into games, more trans issues to be put into games, more trans issues to be put in the game storyline, even though the game storyline is set in an era and set in a setting where this kind of stuff didn't even exist. And it's the same kind of thing that happened over in Ubisoft. Classic example is Assassin's Creed Shadows, where they had an African American, a big butch African American, as a samurai, even though there was no actual concrete solid evidence that this actually happened during that era in Japan. But again, it was the woke left mind virus that forced it in. Equal rights, equal opportunity, get woke, go broke. Get woke, go broke. The last Assassin's Creed game, like Veilguard, didn't even hit 50% of the sales target. Because when you push an agenda, like the LGBTQ agenda, into people's faces, it's like, here, you will take this agenda and you will like it. When you do that to the buying public, what are the buying public going to do? They're not going to spend their money on your game. They're going to go buy something else. And that's exactly what happened with Assassin's Creed Shadows. That's exactly what happened with Dragon Age Veilguard. And that's exactly what's happening with practically every single new game release from Electronic Arts and practically every single new game release from Ubisoft. So what happens now? Well, here's the thing. The new Ubisoft, when the old one goes bankrupt, which it will do, because you've got to look at what happened and what Ubisoft actually did with this new company that they carved off, that Tencent, owned by the Chinese government, now owns. All of the major Ubisoft titles. None of the crap ones. All of the major Ubisoft titles have been transferred to this new company. Ubisoft knows they're going bankrupt. They know it's going to happen. So they've made this new company that Tencent and the Chinese government now has a controlling interest on to chuck all their well-known games into and let the old ship sink. What happens if you try and push for LGBTQ plus rights in China? Go and Google it. So that's the country that basically controls Ubisoft now, via Tencent. What happens if you try and protest LGBTQ plus rights in Saudi Arabia? Go and Google it. In fact, for that matter, what happens if you're caught being gay, being lesbian, or being transgender in Saudi Arabia, doing things that the Saudi Arabian monarchy and government do not formally agree with? Go and Google it. In fact, don't bother Googling it. You probably already know. You're either stoned to death or publicly executed. Now, granted, it's not that bad over in China, but the Chinese government frowns upon lesbians, gays, bis, and trans. They frown upon them, but it's not illegal. So we're now at the point, ladies and gents, where the snapback has basically now happened. The LGBTQ propagandists have pushed their message so hard that they have essentially bankrupted Electronic Arts and Ubisoft, to the point that Ubisoft has got to carve out a big chunk of itself and sell itself to China because nobody in the West wants to touch them anymore. And we're now at the point where Electronic Arts has been hemorrhaging money left, right and centre for the past half decade because of the latest games that BioWare and other publishers have released that's full of the woke mind virus. And who did they sell themselves to? Because no major Western company would want to be a major player. Saudi Arabia, the biggest anti-LGBTQ country on the planet. And EA willingly gave themselves up to them. Because the higher-ups at EA know that the game's now up. It's now up. Get woke, you go broke. So yeah, that golf clap was to all you woke LGBTQ flag wavers who try to push your propaganda in every single EA game, every single Ubisoft game. Well, now EA is owned by a country where all of that is illegal. You cannot be gay. You cannot be trans. You cannot be bi. You cannot be a lesbian. Because it's illegal. And do you honestly think that kind of subject will be broached in future EA games once the takeover is finalised? Why don't you go over to Saudi Arabia and protest your LGBT rights over there? Oh, that's right, because you'll immediately be jailed. That's why you don't do it over there, because you're too scared to. Same thing for Ubisoft. Even though Tencent's a private company, they're basically owned by the Chinese government. And even though the Chinese government has not deemed lesbian, gay, bi or trans people illegal, it's frowned upon by the Communist Party. Frowned upon very severely. You will not be executed like you will be in Saudi Arabia, but any public showing of being gay, of being lesbian, of being trans, any public showing is frowned upon. Do you honestly think that Ubisoft, the new company of Ubisoft, that's now 25% owned by Tencent, that's owned by the Chinese government, is going to have any kind of open LGBTQ storylines in their future games? No, they won't. They won't. That's now the two biggest Western game publishers, no longer majoritively owned by the West. And it's thanks to both of those companies going broke because they went woke. And now we're at a point that any future games developed by those two companies are not even going to touch on the subject of LGBTQ rights. Because in Saudi Arabia it's illegal, and in China it's frowned upon. Well done, all you overweight, nose-ringed, pink, blue, purple or orange-haired far left-wing lunatics that infected BioWare, infected Electronic Arts and infected Ubisoft. You've just pulled up the drawbridge behind you and you can't get out. I would suggest, before your new owners sack you publicly, that you resign and get another job.